Yeah. Oh, yeah. Marc's already been by. I see folks coming in this morning sporting some sweaters and warm weather clothing. A little chilly out there, isn't it? It's warming up in here. We're going to be spending a lot of our time in the Gospel of John, chapters 9 and 10. That's where we'll be heading in just a moment. We are continuing our study of the life of Jesus. We've passed the Galilean ministry and are heading toward Jerusalem, where Jesus will have his final confrontation. We're a few months away, though, and I'm going to remind you of that. We've been using this chart, and that will help us a lot. But before we look at the chart, let me remind you that 2 weeks ago, we saw Jesus in the Gospel of John in Jerusalem for the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Booths, and that occurs in October of every year. I don't know if it ever creeps into September, but you know how you go from one calendar to another calendar, another ancient calendar. Sometimes there's some interesting overlap. And then we started last week Luke's central section, this unique feature of Luke's gospel, where you, from Luke 9:51 through about 1944, this large section contains material Jesus teaching, and he's always traveling toward Jerusalem. He had set his face toward Jerusalem. We'll resume talking about that more next week. And that interrupts John's gospel. So we're completely bypassing Matthew and Mark right now during this unique period of time when Jesus is in Judea, just a few months before he's going to die. And today we will see Jesus at the Feast of Dedication. What is this feast known as better? So there's Luke's central section. Jesus at the Feast of Dedication. We know this feast more conventionally as Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication, Hanukkah. And Jesus is there. And there's a reason why Jesus, it's being emphasized in the Gospel of John, and it's not mentioned in Matthew, Mark, or Luke. None of the others do. Only John does. We're now in December. As a matter of fact, Hanukkah for this calendar year started last Sunday, and it ends tomorrow. So Hanukkah is going on right now. Isn't that interesting? As we, by coincidence, are following in the footsteps of Jesus, this is his last Hanukkah, where he is confronted by the religious leaders. What will happen the following April? April of AD 30, I believe. The crucifixion. We are months away from Jesus in the spring of the year being crucified for the sins of humanity, altering forever human history, dying on the cross of Calvary for us. Here's a chart that we've been using. It's in a book, but I'll just put on the screen here. You can see the Feast of Tabernacles at the beginning of this later Judean ministry of Jesus' overall ministry. This 3-month period that Jesus is in Judea. And you can also notice, I know for those of us who have been here several times, you already know about this, but I see some folks visiting. This is a running dispersion of where the Gospels talk about these events. So the green is Matthew. This red, that doesn't look very red, it's the Gospel of Mark. Notice there's no green, there's no red. It's just this dark color, this purple, and the bright blue. That's Luke. So you've got the Feast of Tabernacles, that's October, and then you've got this central section. And then today we're going to be looking at this time period here that no other gospel discusses, and it's the Feast of Dedication. The Feast of Dedication. That's where we are in our study. Next week, we're going to continue. Oh, forgot. I have this nice little arrow following along. Where we're going to be next week as we continue the ministry of Jesus, we're going to be in the Perean ministry. At the end of today's events, the religious leaders try to kill Jesus again. And that persuades him to leave Judea and go to Perea for 3.5 months. And that's going to take us up to April, when Jesus is going to die. Just trying to give us some chronological bearings as we go through our material today. Jesus spent about 3 months in Judea near the end of his ministry at the Feast of Tabernacles in October, the Feast of Dedication, Hanukkah, in December. And that's where we are right now. In Jerusalem, there is this pool, and here is an architectural artist's rendering of the Pool of Siloam with its 5 porticos. And that's what we'll see described here in the Gospel of John. Am I confusing the events of John 5, the 5 porticos? But we have here a nice pool in the center of the city, and that's where this man is going to go and wash. What we do not have time to do is look at John 9 and 10 in great detail. I wish we did. But in our Bible class this morning, what we're going to do is spend some time looking at these 2 chapters because they go together. What is it that Jesus does in John 10? He talks about himself as the Good Shepherd. I am the Good Shepherd. We're very familiar with that concept, Jesus describing himself as the Good Shepherd. But this goes along with John 9, and I want to emphasize that today as well. Throughout our study of the Gospels, what we have tried to do is look at all 4 together and not look at Matthew in light of Matthew, Mark in light of Mark, Luke in light of Luke. But it's hard to do when there's not a parallel for these passages. And I think it would be helpful for us to remind ourselves that in the Gospel of John, this is unique to John, there are 7 signs. That's what John calls them. What would we call them? Not signs when Jesus turns water to wine or heals someone or raises somebody. Miracles, but that's not what John calls them in his gospel. But these are the 7 signs. First sign, wine. in John 2, verse 11, John 4, 54. This is the second sign that Jesus performed in Cana of Galilee. And as we go through the gospel, what we see are only 7 miracles that Jesus performs. Only 7. This is the 6th one, the penultimate miracle in the Gospel of John, the healing of the blind man. What will be the ultimate miracle that Jesus performs, of these 7 at least? Well, the raising of Lazarus from the dead after he had been dead 4 days. And what is that anticipating? God's miracle, his own, Jesus' own resurrection from the dead. Trying to get our bearings as we are looking at John chapter 9. We're nearing the end of Jesus' ministry, December, just shortly before he dies. Here we are in John 9. This is all part of the book of signs, as it's called, chapters 1 through 12. All right, something else unique about John's gospel, as you well know, are the 7 sayings. You've got 7 signs, 7 sayings. The 7 signs all fit neatly in that first 12 chapters, that book of signs. These overlap. It starts in chapter 6. We looked at the first one recently when Jesus was at the Feast of Tabernacles. When it's also, what's the other name for the Feast of Tabernacles? It's sometimes called the Festival of Lights. And so Jesus, during that festival, said, I am the light of the world. Well, Hanukkah is a man-made feast. It's not a divinely made feast, but it's a man-made feast that picks up on Hanukkah. That picks up on the Feast of Booths. What was Hanukkah supposed to celebrate, by the way? The Maccabean revolt, when they had rededicated the temple that had been desecrated by Antiochus Epiphanes. And that's part of that period between the Testaments. We don't talk about a whole lot. But the Hanukkah was also called the Festival of Lights. And during this, Jesus says again, I am the light of the world. What is so significant? We said this a couple weeks ago. What is it that's so significant about Jesus saying, I am this, I am that. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the resurrection and the life. All right, God called himself. That is his personal name. In fact, it's based on his personal name. Exodus 3, verse 14. Who do I say sent me? Moses asked. I am who I am. Tell them, I am has sent you. God's name is based on the idea of being, to be. He always has been, always will be. He is eternal. He is all powerful. Jesus is picking up that moniker, so to speak. He is saying I am repeatedly, claiming to be God. Yes, sir? The answer is yes. The lame man. Ah. Right. And if you're in John 9, you go back a page, it's the same thing where they're saying, well, Abraham's our father. And Jesus says, no, Abraham's not your father. I'll tell you who your father is, though. Your father is the devil. He was a liar from the beginning. And it's in John 8, verse 58, that Jesus says to them, let me tell you about me. Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. And we spent a lot of time talking about that a couple of weeks ago, really emphasizing Jesus claimed to be God. He is deity. I am means I am eternal. I am all powerful. I am God. And all throughout the Gospel of John, he makes this statement. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door of the sheep. We'll be looking at 2 and 3 this morning. You look at that outline of John 9. I'm not expecting you to jot this down. I'm hoping you maybe have paragraph headings in your Bible that will help identify these various sections. Verse 8, verse 13, verse 18, Verse 24, I have little marks in my Bible, maybe you do too, giving indications that this is a new paragraph or a new little section. Verse 35. There's a lot in this story, as you can see. We do not have time to look at all the details. But somebody give me the gist. What's the gist of John 9, the story? This blind man sitting outside. Yeah, he makes saliva with dirt, applies it to the man's eyes. Go wash in the pool of Siloam. He comes back seeing. How did he get to the pool if he's blind? Oh, okay. Maybe he had some help. Okay. And then Jesus disappears. Who comes up to this blind man and starts saying, well, aren't you that blind man? You can't be that blind man. We've known you forever. You've been blind. And this is a powder keg occasion, because if you confess that this Jesus guy who's been going around preaching and performing miracles for the last 3 years in Galilee and messing with us here in Judea as well, if you confess him to be the prophet or even the Christ, what's going to happen to you? You're going to get kicked out of the synagogue by the Jews, as they're called here, the Pharisees. And they start interrogating this man. Eventually, they get his parents involved. Is this your son? Yeah. Was he blind? Yeah. Who healed him? Oh, you ask him. He's of age. Everybody's terrified. So what's going on here? We're summarizing this passage. It starts off with this. Let's read verses 1 through 5. As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, it is not that this man sinned, or his parents, so we've already brought in his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. And then Jesus says this in verse 4, we must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. What is Jesus anticipating there in verse 4? His crucifixion. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Can the one who claims to be the light of the world, can he touch somebody's eyes and open them? He can. And so he spits on the ground, verse 6, made mud with saliva. Excellent that Rachel brought that out for us. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said, go wash in the pool of Siloam. And he comes back seeing, but Jesus is not there. I'm pointing that out to you. It's not emphasized. There's no Jesus. He's gone. This idea of being born in sin comes up again in the Gospel of John when the Jews, again, these are the Pharisees. John's Gospel doesn't call them the Pharisees. He calls them the Jews. I don't know why. But the Pharisees answered him, you were born in utter sin, when they're interrogating him later. So remember that. There's this idea of people being in sin and not knowing it, not realizing it. After all, this man has a physical malady. Something's wrong, right? There must be sin involved because of his physical malady. And I see heads going, no, that would be superstition, wouldn't it? It has nothing to do with sin, being born this way. Well, the question continues as John 9 ends. And I'm just bringing this up now before we get to it, because I want us to see the continuity of this entire section. It starts off talking about sin. It ends talking about sin. And Jesus is talking to the Pharisees here at the end, and he says, if you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say, we see, your sin remains. What are you talking about there? Jesus is talking to the religious leaders here at the end of John 9. And he says, because you say, we see, your sin remains. So you have a man who was physically blind, but he saw something that these Pharisees who aren't physically blind He saw something that they were blind to. You see what John is doing? A man is physically blind, but he can see spiritually. These men are physically able to see, but they are blind spiritually. Very creative, isn't it? This is how John works. He does this all the time. Now, this man's just sitting there. He's blind. He's a beggar. I don't think they had Social Security back then. He's sitting there begging. Jesus heals him. And as we go through this chapter, John shows us, I believe, the development of this blind man's faith. I guess we should call him the formerly blind man's faith. When he's interrogated, who opened your eyes? Or how were your eyes opened? That's verse 10. And what he says is, this man called Jesus. That's what the guy's name is. And they start talking to him further, and they say, how can a man who is a sinner, there's that idea of sinning again, how can this Jesus who is a sinner do such signs? And the man says, well, you know what? He must be a prophet. I believe we're seeing the progression of his faith. Then he ridicules, he uses sarcasm with the religious leaders. And he says, in verse 30, the man's been interrogated by the Pharisees, and we're deep into this chapter now. The man said, why? This is an amazing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. You're the religious leaders. You should know where he comes from because he opened my eyes. He's using sarcasm here. He's not being very nice. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. So we go from, well, his name is Jesus, I guess he's a prophet, to being, he must be from God. And then Jesus does reappear at the end, and he speaks to the man. And in verse 35, Jesus heard that he had cast him out. They had kicked him out of the synagogue, which has tremendous implications for him and his family. Having found him, Jesus said to him, do you believe in the Son of Man? He answered, who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? Jesus said, you have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you. He said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. What has happened here over the course of John 9? A physically blind man sees Jesus clearly. Physically seeing men, the Pharisees, are blind as a bat spiritually. And that's being emphasized in this brilliant narrative, John chapter 9. It is just so incredible. There are so many little nuances and details in this chapter that we do not have time to go through. For example, and I mentioned this to y'all before, 2 weeks ago, in John 9, verse 9, and I make this point again because I really believe in it. When people are arguing about the blind man who has just been able to start seeing again, they start questioning themselves and say, well, who is he? I mean, this can't be that blind guy, can it? Some said, it is he. Others said, no, but he is like him. He, the blind man, the former blind man, kept saying, I am the man. And what do we say about those words? I am he, or I am the man. I am he, your translation might say in verse 9. I am the man. The two words the man are not there. Our English translations are trying to smooth it out for us because this would sound really strange, wouldn't it? I am is all he would say. He's saying the same words that Jesus was saying. I am the light of the world. I am the good shepherd. This man is becoming a little Jesus in front of our eyes. And that's exactly what we're supposed to be. Is this man claiming to be God? No, he's just answering the question. I'm the guy. But he's using these same two little words, I am, that Jesus used. He is growing in his faith while these other guys are as blind as a bat. What do you think about this chapter? What little we have looked at it. Isn't it remarkable? There is just so much here in this chapter. Let's talk about the mud for a moment. the dirt that Jesus used his saliva and touched the man's eyes. There's a lot of emphasis on this mud. Verse 6, we've already read this. Jesus spit on the ground, made mud, applied it to the man's eyes. In recounting, because he's being interrogated, who did this? What happened? The man called Jesus made mud. And then you see this again in verses 14 and 15. It was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. We'll talk about that in a moment. The Pharisees again asked him, how had he received his sight? And he said, he put mud on my eyes that I washed, and I see. How many people in the Bible performed the miracle of giving sight to others? How many people restored people's sight by touching them? And when we've discussed this before, there's normally blindness involved, and then it's reversed when it's happened. Elisha reversed the blindness of some Syrians. They had been struck blind, and then he prayed that God would, but it was God who did this. This is unique. This is interesting to me, and maybe somebody can blow it out of the water, but in the Bible, only God opens the eyes of the blind. This was supposed to be the work of the Messiah. Isaiah talks about the Messiah who would come and he would heal people. He would heal people from being crippled and being lame and various things, including opening the eyes of the blind. Yes, sir. The light coming into the world. Right. Right. And Nicodemus is referring to the tail end of John 2, where Jesus performed many miracles, and he had not revealed himself to any man. The man, Nicodemus, came to him, and Nicodemus still doesn't see, still doesn't understand who Jesus is, but he's starting to. And that's excellent. Good. Yeah. All right. I wasn't going to go this direction, but I just got a text from David Hutchins. Yeah, David texted me. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead before we do. Well, that's the point that David was just making. What could possibly be going on here in John 9? It's talking about God, Jesus, God in the flesh, recreating this man. He is now a new creation because he has taken mud. What did God do when he made man? He took dirt, he fashioned it into a man. And yeah, he breathed into the man the breath of life. Now, the Gospel of John wouldn't be referring to that. Okay. There's a lot going on under the hood in the Gospel of John, in particular, John chapter 9. This is an extremely important chapter, and that is exactly what I believe is going on here. Let's look at the tail end, verse 39. For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. Some of the Pharisees near him heard these things and said to him, "Are we also blind?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say, 'We see,' your guilt remains. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber." All right, let's stop there. We just read John 10, verse 1. Is there a break between John 9 and John 10 in the Gospel of John? Well, yeah, there's a chapter division right there. But did John make that chapter division? And there's no information that says, and on the next day, Jesus did this. There's no natural break. It simply continues into chapter 10. And further, what we also see is reference to the blind man in John 10, verse 21. I've got that on the screen there. So Jesus is giving his "I am the good shepherd" discourse in John 10, and it says at one point the people are responding and saying, "These are not the words of one who is oppressed by a demon," like the Pharisees are saying. "Can a demon open the eyes of the blind?" That's John 10, verse 21. What is that referring to? The events of John 9. And then a little later in John 11, after, it's before Lazarus is raised from the dead. Some of them said, "Oh, this miracle worker Jesus, who opened the eyes of the blind man, couldn't he have also kept this man Lazarus from dying?" This incident in John 9, this amazing narrative in John 9, continues to reverberate in the Gospel of John, chapter 10, chapter 11. This is a really important chapter. And I know we don't have a lot of time to delve into it, and we have in the past, but I hope that's helpful. I hope that challenges us to go, I want to study this further. I want to see more of what's going on here in John chapter 9. Let's go on to John chapter 10, and we're going to look at this I am the good shepherd discourse. Jesus already gave the I am the bread of life discourse in John 6. Let's read this. Let's just read it. John 10. "Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber." Who's he talking about here? The Pharisees. Excellent. "But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep." Who's he talking about there? I'm the shepherd. I'm the shepherd. "To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he, the shepherd, has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers." This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. And so he finally makes it as plain as he can. Verse 7, "I am the door of the sheep." And then in verse 11, "I am the good shepherd." Tell me about the Pharisees. What is their role in Judea? What are they supposed to be doing? Okay, the law keepers, they're the experts. They're the ones who read the law. They're the ones who explain it to people. But what's the problem? They don't keep the law themselves. What was Jesus' favorite word for them? Hypocrites, for good reason. By the way, Nicodemus was one of these Pharisees. Remember the Sanhedrin Council, in fact. Paul the Apostle had been a Pharisee. From my perspective, when I read about the Pharisees, when I see the kind of people that they were, especially in contrast with the Sadducees, these aristocratic rich guys who were very physically minded, and anyway, they were evil. Well, the Pharisees are kind of the good guys. But Jesus says, no, they're really not. They're really not. Yes, ma'am. They clung to their traditions, knowing that their traditions were overriding the law. Matthew 15 talks about that. Okay. Okay. And what is the best example of that? During Jesus' ministry, the Pharisees saying, ha, you broke the law because you healed on the Sabbath. And I said I was going to bring up that detail from John 9, and I didn't. Why does it take so long in John 9? We're going back to John 9 for a moment. Why does it take so long? Verse 14, before John says, oh, by the way, it was a Sabbath day when Jesus did all this. It took us 14 verses to get to that. That's something else to look at. And we already saw that in John 5 as well. It took him a while to get to that as well. Jesus is God. He can do whatever he wants, whenever he wants. What did Jesus say during his ministry? The Sabbath was not made for man, but man for the Sabbath. Did I say that right? I said it wrong, didn't I? Are we supposed to slavishly follow a law and just honor the Sabbath because that's what the Mosaic law says and that's what I'm supposed to do? Or is there a reason why we honor the Sabbath day, or the Jewish people specifically honor the Sabbath day? This is a day of celebration. This is a day of relishing in our relationship with God. We cease all work. That's what Sabbath means, rest, cessation from work. And we celebrate that we are God's people. They spent time in the synagogue on the Sabbath. They read Scripture. Now, is Sunday the Christian Sabbath? There are some connections. There are some parallels, but no, it is not. Can I go mow my grass this afternoon? No, because my lawnmower is frozen. There's nothing wrong with working on the Sabbath. Is there a principle? Is there a principle that we can derive from God's command, honor the Sabbath, keep it holy? Do we need time to rest, to focus on our relationship with God? Once a week. That's not what we do in our American society, though. We work and we work and we work and we push ourselves, and the next thing you know, we have ulcers. We're falling apart. There's a principle there, and that's a good concept. In John 10, Jesus is talking about himself as the good shepherd, and who are the thieves and the robbers who want to break in and steal the sheep and destroy them? The Pharisees. Now, this language about Jesus being a good shepherd, it goes back to Old Testament terminology. Who is the ultimate shepherd in the nation of Israel? The physical representation, the physical shepherd, not God. That's the easy set. The Lord is my shepherd. Yes. But the imagery of a shepherd goes back to David. And kings were compared to being shepherds of their people who care for their people. I'm not a shepherd. I'm not the son of a shepherd. Tell me about herding sheep, though. You would have, in the ancient world, even today, I guess, in the Near East, you would have all these sheep. And some sheep belonged to one shepherd and some sheep belonged to another shepherd. And the shepherds would team up. Why would they team up? Protection? Yeah. And they put them all in the great big pen. But when it was time to take their sheep and lead them to water, what would the shepherd do? He would scan each sheep and make sure it was his. Boop. Okay, you go. All right. Boop. All right, you belong to Joe over there. Okay. What do sheep do? They listen to the shepherd's voice. And so Jesus is pointing out some of the unique characteristics of sheep that maybe we don't appreciate unless we have been told about this or studied about this. Sheep hear the shepherd's voice and they go, oh, he's over here. I'm going to go over there now. And so what if Bob starts calling Joe sheep? What's Joe sheep going to do when he hears Bob calling? Nothing. He's just going to look at him. Yes, sir. He's just probably going to say, bah. Yeah. Okay, lost sheep. And what does the shepherd do when the sheep get lost? right? And that is a perfect, beautiful parallel metaphor for us as Christians. Today, when we start thinking about a modern type of illustration, I don't know anything that works as well as a shepherd with his sheep. And it's a beautiful metaphor that describes God as our shepherd, Jesus as our shepherd, and we as his sheep. Yes, ma'am. Right. Okay. And Jesus is the best shepherd in the whole wide world. He's going to protect his sheep. There is, oh yeah. Let's look at Jesus' description of himself. So I'm going to skip. There's a lot of division over who Jesus is. Some are saying he has a demon. Others are saying, well, I mean, he opened the eyes of the blind. How can he have a demon? Let's spend just the last few minutes of our class. We've got about 7 minutes left, looking at John 22 through verse 39. There's a lot here, but I want to remind you of verse 28, and then we're going to read some of these verses. I give them, the sheep, I give them eternal life. They will never perish, and no one will snatch them out of my hand. There's a newer song that we sing, and I'm drawing a blank. I don't remember the name. I didn't plan on mentioning this. But it says, it quotes this verse, no one will snatch them from my hand. Your only son, da, 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 da. Somebody find that number. We'll look at it. I don't remember. Okay, I know what he's talking about. And I love singing that song because it instantly brings me to John 10. It's called Lamb of God. That's not a number. I need a number. It's in the supplement, isn't it? It's in the supplement. No, it is. Your only son. Like I said, it's in this book. 950. No, that's not the song I'm thinking of. Does it have that wording in there? It's the one that Benjamin Torno likes to lead, and I believe it is in the supplement. Sorry, I didn't mean to get us distracted. Verse 22. At that time, the Feast of Dedication took place at Jerusalem. So here we are now. It was winter. That makes sense. It's December. And Jesus was walking in the temple in the colonnade of Solomon. So the Jews gathered around him and said to him, how long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly. Well, for crying out loud, Jesus has been telling them. Jesus answered them, I told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name bear witness about me, opening the eyes of the blind. But you do not believe because you are not among my sheep. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish, and no one will snatch them out of my hand. So I'm getting information thrown at me. It is a song that I was thinking of, and I was misleading you. I apologize. It's in Christ alone. We're not going to sing it, but it's in verse 3, as I recall. Verse 4. No guilt in life, no fear in death. That is the power of Christ in me. From life's first cry to final breath, Jesus commands my destiny. No power of hell, no scheme of man can ever pluck them from his hand. And that's all I wanted to bring out. Next time you sing that song, I want you to think of John 10. That's what it's referring to. Jesus has a hold on us. When we are in him, we abide in him, we remain in him, and no one can snatch us from his grasp and take us from him. How does that make you feel? Sheep being led by the good shepherd who dies for the sheep. When that wolf comes along, Jesus sacrifices himself for us. This is a powerful metaphor, describing us as sheep, but Jesus as the ultimate good shepherd who gives himself for the sheep. Verse 39 says, they sought to arrest him, but he escaped their hand. Why? Because he claimed to be God. Verse 35, and we're going to run out of time here. Verse 37. If I am not doing the works of my Father, then do not believe me. But if I do them, even though you do not believe me, believe the works, that you may know and understand that the Father is in me, and I am in the Father. Again, they sought to arrest him, but he escaped from their hands. Why are the religious leaders so upset that Jesus is talking about being one in the Father and the Father in him? Because they think he's blaspheming. That's another factor. They know that the people are greatly influenced and are following Jesus and starting to question whether or not the Pharisees are really all they claim to be. So we are out of time. We're going to see Jesus now move into Perea, and he will be there for 3.5 months, and that will be portrayed for us in the Gospel of Luke, and that's where we'll be next week as we continue Luke's central section. Thank you for walking through this marvelous passage with me. John chapters 9 and 10. Thank you.